My name is Elmir. I'm 63 years old, retired from construction and have lived my entire life in Davenport, Iowa. I've never been one to talk much, but today I need to tell something that never left my head. Tell me something. What would you do if your own child looked you in the eye, in front of everyone, and said out loud that you were a loser, not a stranger? Your child, your blood. I know that sounds harsh, and it is. Because when ingratitude comes from inside the house, it doesn't just hurt the skin, it corrodes the soul. Sometimes we spend our whole lives giving ourselves, paying bills, giving shelter, food and love. And in the end, he still hears that it wasn't enough, that there is another man in the place, a new father, a winner. What about you? You become just a burden. If you've ever felt like you've given it your all and yet you've been discarded, this video is for you. Today, I'm going to tell you what happened that night at dinner, what I heard, which I didn't say, and what happened next when silence became my weapon. This is the story of when my silence spoke louder than any scream. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. That night, when my son called me a loser in front of the table set, the hot food still on the plate, and the look of my daughter trying to understand what was happening, I didn't say a word. I kept silent. But inside me, something broke. A part that I thought had already hardened over time. But no, she wasn't dead. That humiliation went through me like a cold nail in my chest, and it was there between the smell of roast beef and the sound of the chair dragging on the floor that my silence began to plan something. He didn't know it, but in a few days he would lose the car I gave him, the house I paid for, and the support he never thanked. And more. His new father would also have to deal with the consequences of thinking he was better than the one who built everything quietly. If this story has already caught you in your heart, if at some point in your life you also had to swallow the sorrow of being called weak by those you only helped, so stay here with me. Press the like button, subscribe to the channel. Not because I'm asking for it, but because telling it out loud is hurting more than I imagined. And when it hurts like that, we only keep talking if we know there's someone really listening. That Sunday, the sun began to slowly sink behind the trees in the backyard, and the smell of lilacs poured in through the half-open kitchen window. Adeline had lovingly prepared everything, the maple leaf patterned tablecloth, her mother's old crockery plates, and juicy roast beef, accompanied by creamy puree and fresh peas. I helped put the cutlery on. I like to keep my hands busy. Too much silence makes me think too much, and when my head starts to go over certain things, I prefer to get up and mess with something useful. James arrived late. Not an "excuse me, Dad," nor a "good night." He came in with his cell phone in his hand, wearing that leather jacket that I know Dylan gave him. He dropped the phone on the table with a dry thud and threw himself on the chair, as if it were a favor. Adeline was the first to start a conversation. She tried to talk about the weather, the flowers in the yard, the new job she was starting at the hospital, but James cut everything with short answers. Cool. Whatever. I'm cool. And every time he opened his mouth, it was as if the air in the room got a little heavier. Dylan showed me some stock this week, he said suddenly, pushing the mash with his fork without eating anything. He said that if I want, I can join him in a new project. Big thing. Adeline smiled with that sweet way of hers, always trying to see the best in people. That's good, bro. It's really important for you to settle on something. But he didn't even let her finish. With Dylan, everything is moving. He has vision, different from certain people. That phrase hit me like a hammer, but I kept cutting the meat on the plate, as if it were just another Sunday. I had already heard a lot of things in silence in this life. But when it comes from his own son, it hurts in a way that not even time knows how to heal properly. He didn't look me in the eye, but every word he uttered brought the shadow of another man into my house. That Dylan, businessman, full of beautiful speech, lined suit, the same man who appeared in my life right after the divorce and was taking up space without even asking permission. And now there, at that table where I've celebrated birthdays, where I've cried for things that no one has seen, his name echoed as if I were some old man sitting there just to watch. No, there are things that we feel even before it happens. The way the person holds the cutlery, the way he sighs, the way it avoids a direct look. Everything was already saying that something heavy was coming. "Dad," he said, dropping the cutlery and leaning back in his chair with that air of superiority, "you should think about stopping working. It's wearing out for nothing. No one else does that at their age. Dylan himself has said, you stick to small things. He thinks big. That's why he's a winner, and you—" "Good." At that moment he stopped. He looked me in the eyes. And then it came. "You're a loser." Silence. I didn't even hear the sound of the kitchen clock anymore. Adeline turned pale, her eyes watering. I only remember squeezing the glass of water so hard that condensation ran down my fingers. It's hard to explain what happens inside us at these times. It's not anger. It's kind of emptiness, as if they were tearing a piece of her very slowly. I looked at him without saying anything, not a word. And what hurt the most was knowing that that boy, who I once carried on my shoulders, who I taught to ride a bike there in Vanderveer Park, now looked at me as if I were a nuisance. And you know, at that moment, I found myself thinking, how many fathers, how many mothers have heard something similar from a child they helped raise with so much love? If you've been listening to me right now, or if this story is poking a pain that you never had the courage to tell, comment here with a simple phrase, just so I know I'm not talking alone. I've lived it. It touched me. It's true. I believe. Sometimes just reading that someone understands, our hearts can take it a little longer. At that moment, Adeline tried to react. He stood up, pointed his finger at his brother and said firmly, "You're being unfair, James. Dad was always the one to support everything. Even when Mom chose to follow another path, he was the one who stayed. You should be ashamed." But James laughed. A dry, bitter, almost cynical laugh. He's just an old man trying to pay as a martyr. Dylan is the one showing me the way. He treats me as an equal. And he got up from the table. He took his jacket, his cell phone, and walked out the door as if he were the owner of the truth. Adeline hugged me before leaving too. I said I was going to try to talk to him. But the house, after they left, was left with a silence that was hard to bear. The food has cooled on the plate. The roast beef has lost its smell, and I stood there, staring at an old photo on the wall, a barbecue from 10 years ago. Everyone was smiling. Before everything changes, before I was demoted to the role of extra in the life I helped to build. But what James didn't know, it's just that my silence that night wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of something he wasn't prepared to face. Want to know what happened after that dinner? So follow me, because it was that same night that I made the first decision that would start to turn the whole story around. And she started with a glass of beer and the starry sky of my backyard. When the door closed and silence took over the house, I was still there, sitting in that wooden chair that creaks whenever someone moves too much. The plate in front of me was almost untouched, and the food no longer tasted like anything. I stared at the glass, feeling the water run through my fingers, but my mind was far away. In fact, it was coming back, going back to all the times I kept silent, when I accepted, when I put love above my own value. "You're a loser." That's what he said. High, clear, with conviction, as if it were true. As if all the years I spent the night on the construction site, returning home with dust even inside my shoe, were worthless. As if the checks I signed to pay for his mistakes had been just an obligation. Dylan is the one who deserves respect. That name hammered in my head like a badly beaten nail. Dylan, my ex-wife's new husband. The man who arrived with big promises, bigger cars, and a calculated way of speaking. The same one who greeted me with a loose hand and the look of someone who thinks he has already won just by wearing expensive perfume. But what really broke me wasn't the comparison. That's what he said right away. I think I'm going to start calling him Dad. That there, it was like being buried alive. My own son, sitting at my table, eating of the food made in the kitchen that I built with these hands, saying that he was going to change my name. I didn't react, not out of weakness, not out of cowardice. I was silent because I learned over the years that certain battles are not won by shouting. They win in the withdrawal, no clean cut. And at that moment, I knew that forgiveness had died right there, between the crumpled napkin and the cold plate. I looked at the family photo on the wall, the four of us at a barbecue years ago, still with hope in our eyes. James must have been about 20 there. Anne smiled. Adeline hugged me by the neck. I was covered in charcoal from the barbecue, and even then I was the only one who looked whole. Now I was just the forgotten old man at the head of the table, told that I was no longer worth anything, but something inside me changed that night. A strange but firm calm, the kind of calm that only comes when you decide to stop bleeding for others. I got up from the table carefully. The chair made its usual noise. I took my glass to the sink, washed it in silence, as if the act of removing the mark of my fingers from the glass was part of a ritual. Then I went to the fridge, got a beer, and opened the back door. The evening breeze was cold but clean. I sat on the patio chair, the one I made myself with pine planks when Adeline was still a child, and looked up at the sky. The stars were more visible that night, and I thought, how do we get here? How does a father become a burden? How does loving too much become a reason for humiliation? I took a sip of the beer. The foam came down bitterly, but it matched what I felt. I started thinking about everything I did for James. In the car I bought when he dropped out of college, in the apartment that I paid for years for him not to be on the street, in the accounts that he let expire and that I solved with my own card while listening to him talk about investments and partnerships with Dylan. It was there, under that silent sky, that I made my first decision. I was going to take away the floor that he thought was his, because that ground was mine. And he was only standing because I held him. If he wanted to know what it was like to win, like Dylan, then he should learn on his own. I was going to cut everything, but with dignity. No scandal, no anger, only justice. And the next day, I would start with the car. You know which car, right? The one he keeps saying is his, but even the insurance was still in my name. Do you have any idea how his reaction was when I knocked on the door asking for the keys? So wait and see. Because it was on this visit that he began to understand that my silence had a name, CPF, deed and bank account. I sat for a long time in that wooden chair in the backyard. I don't even know how much. The sound of crickets and the smell of lilacs held me there, as if the whole world had stopped just to let me think. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't break anything. I just breathed. Because when the pain comes from the one you raised in your lap, it doesn't explode, it sinks. I looked at the sky, remembering the day I bought James's first car, a used Civic, dark blue, year 2008. He didn't even have a license yet, but I wanted him to have a reason to continue. He had just dropped out of the second course of college, and I thought that maybe, with independence, there would also be responsibility. I was wrong. And I deceived more times after that. I paid rent for 3 years. I held a credit card in my name because it was getting organized. When he got into a business deal with a friend and lost $5,000, I was the one who covered the debt. I never threw it in my face. I never charged. Because he was my son. Because a real father loves in silence, even when love comes back hurt. But that night, sitting there between the smell of flowers and the damp wood of the chair, I understood that I was sustaining the disrespect, feeding an ego that no longer recognized me as a man, let alone as a father. And worse, he did not do it alone. There was that Dylan behind him, always there, with that way of someone who knows everything, who teaches, who invests, who opens doors. Anne thought it was beautiful. He said he was inspiring. And James, well, James wanted to be him. I wanted to wear his suit, talk like him. But deep down, he only knew how to repeat the arrogance. I remembered a conversation I overheard a while ago. James speaking to a friend on speakerphone. My father is a good man, but he lives in a small world. Dylan shows me how to think big. That was kept, even though I pretended I didn't. And now, seeing everything as a puzzle that finally fit, I realized, as long as I kept holding the bills, they were going to keep spitting on the plate I served. So I decided. From the next morning, everything that was in my name and within reach of my hand, I would take it back, not out of revenge, but for justice. It would no longer give ground to those who dig holes. I needed, for the first time in years, to choose myself. I went back inside the house, washed the glass of beer, closed the curtains in the living room, and lay down. Sleep did not come easy, but when it came, it was light, perhaps the lightest in a long time. And when the day dawned, with that clear spring sky, I was already up. I made my coffee, black, sugar-free. I took the envelope with the car document that was stored in the closet drawer, put on my worn sneakers, and left. James's address was still the same. I had paid for that place, after all. When I stopped the car in front, he was washing the sidewalk, with headphones in his ears, looking satisfied with life. I turned off the engine, got out, and went straight to the point. I want the keys. He took off his headphones and looked at me as if I were speaking Greek. What keys? From the car. That black Civic 2015. It's in my name. Insurance, IPVA, everything. I'm getting it back. He laughed. He laughed out loud. He looked to the side, as if he hoped someone would see the scene. You're kidding, right, Dad? Now you decided to impose yourself? I'm serious, James. I want the keys. I didn't scream. I didn't change my voice. I just stared steadily. He noticed. He tried to stare at me, but he dodged. And then he murmured, with his usual arrogance, "That's pathetic. You won't last in this tough guy pose." He turned his back, entered the house, and returned 2 minutes later, throwing the keys in my direction. "Do whatever you want with this garbage. Dylan has already said he's going to help me with a new one." I took the keys, without answering. I got in the car. The last time I was there was when I left him with a full tank after fixing the gearbox he broke. I drove back feeling a weight off my back. It wasn't for the car. It was by choice. For the courage to withdraw, to cut. And that same day, after storing the vehicle in the garage, I sat on the porch with a hot cup of coffee and looked at the gate. Because my next stop was already decided. And this time, it involved the bank, an old account, and a mortgage that he thought would last forever. Do you have any idea what happens when a spoiled son finds out that the house where he lives is going up for auction? Well then, prepares the heart. Because what comes next, no one saw coming, neither did he. On the same day I took his car, I went to my friend Harold's workshop just to do a quick check. I wanted to make sure everything was right before pulling the Civic over into the garage for good. While he was tinkering with the engine, I stood there sitting on an iron stool, watching the coming and going of the street. And you know, it seemed that the world was going on normally, while mine inside had turned upside down. But it wasn't sadness, it was a new sensation, as if after years of walking down, I had finally raised the column. I returned home before lunch and stayed in silence for a while, just looking out the window. The car stopped there, the flowers in the garden that Adeline takes care of with so much affection, and a strange peace inside the chest. I knew that this wouldn't be the last time I would need to do this, but I also knew it was the beginning of something. It was the first crack in a castle of pride that my son built with my bricks. Later, when Adeline arrived from the hospital, she noticed the car in the garage and understood it right away. "Does James already know?" she asked. "Yes." "And how did he react?" "His way. He tried to laugh, he tried to disdain, but he handed over the keys. She didn't say anything. He just hugged me. And in that hug, I felt that I was on the right path. We don't educate children only with school and food. Sometimes the last lesson is silence, the withdrawal. Enough is enough. The next day I went to the bank. It was time to review some pending issues that, until then, I had left aside for convenience. I arrived early because I like to solve everything before noon. The manager, a polite girl named Megan, pulled up my background. There were old documents there, closed joint accounts, but one of them drew attention. A mortgage. That house where James lives. Technically, it was still tied to me. I had made an agreement years ago so as not to leave him helpless after the divorce, but I never passed anything definitively. He thought it was his, but on paper, it was still mine. And it was there, with the extract in my hand and the sun hitting the window of the branch, that I made the second move. I requested the sale of the property. I formalized everything with lawyer Tom, who helped me in the past. Tom looked me in the eyes and said, "Elmia, are you sure?" "Not for sure. I have clarity, and this is worth more." I left the bank with the paper in my hands and a firm calm in my chest. Because look, I never wanted to see my son in need, but he needed to understand that life charges, and that the comfort he boasted came from someone he had already judged as a loser. It was time to show what it really meant to lose. And look, if you're still here listening to me so far, if you've reached this point, I can only thank you. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story without flourish. If this is touching you in any way, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not by number, no. It's just for me to know that there's someone on the other side really listening. Because there are things that we only tell when we feel that there is someone listening with their heart. The following week, the notification arrived at James's house. It was delivered by hand. He tried to call me, sent me a message. Ignored. Then he tried to pass by Adeline. She replied with a single sentence, "Talk to your father, now it's up to him." And that's when he showed up at the door of my house, crumpled t-shirt, haggard face. He was not the same James at dinner. He no longer had that arrogance in his eyes, but I still had no regret, only anger. "You're taking everything from me out of a tantrum, is that it?" "I'm not taking anything away from you. I'm just collecting what's mine. What you had for years without thanking you. That's not fair. And what you said to me at dinner, was it fair?" He was silent. For the first time, silent. I opened the door calmly, and before entering I said, "Justice begins when silence enters the room." And I closed it. But what he didn't know is that Dylan, his great mentor, was also in my sights. And what I discovered in the following days, everything changed. Do you have any idea what happens when the winner's castle starts to crumble from within? So wait, because when I open the papers of the accountant Ellen, not even Dylan will be able to smile. The next morning the sky was cloudy, but it was not raining. That kind of time that leaves the world kind of suspended, as if it were waiting for our decision before moving on. I drank my coffee slowly, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the bottom of the cup for a while. I thought long and hard before doing what I was going to do that day, but the truth is that inside, it was already done from the moment I heard my son call me a loser. I took the blue folder where I keep the most important documents, checked the mortgage number, the old receipts, and went to the bank. The manager already knew me from other times. Megan, a soft-spoken young woman, always treated me with respect. When he saw me enter with that thick envelope under his arm, he motioned for me to sit down and asked, "Is everything okay, Mr. Elmia?" "Now it's going to stay," I replied. I handed over the papers and said I wanted to immediately cancel the automatic mortgage transfer on the Lincoln Street house. She frowned. "But that house is still tied to your name, right?" "It is, and it will continue for a short time. I have already filed a request for sale. I just don't want another penny coming out of my account to cover my son's housing." She was silent for a few seconds, typed on the computer, confirmed the information, and looked at me again, half hesitantly. "Are you sure? This will directly affect his situation." I took a deep breath. "Look, Megan, 10 years ago, when I signed that financing, it was with the money that I saved sweating on the construction site, under the sun, with knee pain and cement in my lungs. I did that because I didn't want my son to live on the street after the divorce, but all I received in return was contempt. He said I'm a loser, so now he will learn the price of living without the support he despised. She nodded with an understanding look. I understand, Mr. Elmere. I will process the request. It will take 48 hours to be effective. I signed the papers. I left the bench lighter, not with joy, but with a strange peace, as if I were at last clearing the ground of my life. I walked slowly to the car. The wind blew hard as I opened the door, and before I could turn the key in the ignition, the cell phone rang. James. I took a deep breath before answering. "What the fuck?" he shouted without even saying hello. "What did you do with the house? I cancelled the payments. Have you gone crazy? Are you going to let me be evicted? I'm not the one doing this, it's you. I gave you time. I gave you everything. Now you are the one who will have to learn on your own." He laughed, a nervous, embarrassed laugh. "Are you doing this out of pride? For revenge? Are you punishing me for telling some truths? No, James, I'm freeing you. We only learn to walk when the ground is no longer given away for free." And I hung up. I kept the phone in my hand for a while. He didn't call again, but I knew that this call was going to be just the beginning, because the first wall had already cracked, and what he thought was home, it was just a sandcastle raised with the effort of a man he refused to see. I went back home, sat on the porch, and wondered what would come next. I still didn't know that the next chapter would lead me to a folder hidden in an old closet, and that in there I would find something about Dylan that would change everything. Do you believe that even the winners have invisible cracks? Well then, get ready, because the so-called new father was about to stumble over his own lie. When I returned from the bank that day, I closed the door slowly and went straight to the shelf where I keep my old folders. They are cardboard boxes, those simple ones, but they carry pieces of my life that no one has ever seen. I sat on the floor of the living room, as I did when the children were small and we set up the Christmas tree. The smell of waxed wood from the house, mixed with the silence, kept me company. I picked up a box labeled James, handwritten, with a blue pen that must have been dry by now. Inside were years of bank statements, deposit slips, receipts, saved birthday cards, everything that, in some way, told the story of a father who never said no. I spent hours there. Each leaf was a memory, the first deposit for college, the monthly apartment in Des Moines when he said he didn't want to live at home anymore, the repair of the broken cell phone that he never told how it went, the show tickets, that mother's birthday present, which he said he would pay for later, and which he never paid. And then, among the leaves, I found an extract from 5 years ago, a $2,800 transfer made in early December. At the time, he said it was to resolve an urgent loan, but a few weeks later, Adeline sent me a picture of James and Dylan in Miami, on the beach, smiles, glasses in hand. Meanwhile, I had spent Christmas alone, eating roast chicken from the grocery store and watching old movie reruns on TV. I looked at that paper as someone facing an old wound, and it hurt, but it hurt differently, as if that pain now came with force, a force that pushes us forward. There, I sat at the kitchen table, turned on the printer and started to organize everything in chronological order, every transfer, each date, every reason. It wasn't to throw it in your face. It was to never forget who I was, and whom he chose to ignore. And you know, if you've made it this far with me, listening to every part of this story, believe me, what I still have to tell you will move you. Because when we think we've seen it all, that's where the truth comes out, and the truth sometimes has teeth. I took a pen and paper and wrote a short letter. No drama, no poetry, only truth. James, as of today, any type of financial support is terminated. For years, I was present in silence. Now I choose silence with absence. This is my last contribution. My farewell as a provider. Life is yours. Walk on your own legs. I folded the paper, put it in an envelope, and left it in his mailbox the next day. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't even knock on the door. That letter was more than a message. It was the end of a cycle. It was a father saying, "My love is not over, but my help is." I returned home with my eyes burning, not of sadness, but of relief. For the first time, I felt that the weight was no longer mine. And that same night, sitting back on the porch with my briefcase on my lap and the documents next to me, I received an unexpected call. It wasn't James. It was an unknown number. When I answered, on the other side, a hesitant voice called me by name. "Mr. Elmere, this is Ellen, Mr. Dillon's accountant." And what she told me, it was the beginning of a scandal that no one imagined. Do you think winners are always clean? So listen to what she had to reveal, because sometimes even the most well-pressed suit hides dirt underneath. The call from accountant Ellen was still echoing in my head when 2 days later I received an email from the bank confirming that the sale of the house was officially underway. James, of course, received the notification first, and that's when the sandcastle began to crumble. Later that afternoon, I saw Anne's name flashing on the phone's display. I took a deep breath before answering. "Elmere, what's going on? James just called me in a panic." She spoke in that tone of someone who is more concerned with the noise than with what caused the bang. "I stopped paying for his life, that's all, but you know he has nowhere to go." "I know, Anne, and I also know that he had time, support, and opportunities. But instead of walking, he chose to sit on the shoulders of others. Now he will have to walk on his own legs. Are you doing this to hit me? No, I'm doing this to free myself." Silence on the other side, short but dense. Before she hung up, I still heard, "Dillon's going to take care of this. He has resources. James is like a son to him." "Funny," I almost answered, but I preferred to keep quiet, because I already knew that Dillon wasn't going to move. Ellen told me too many things. James, in turn, tried to appeal. Called. He sent messages. He called me everything but father. Then he disappeared for 2 days. Adeline was the one who told me, "He's staying at a friend's house." Dillon didn't let him stay there. He said that it was not what was agreed. I just shook my head. James thought he had a new father, but what he had was an image sponsor. And not even that anymore. Because when money tightens, the fake ties tear fast. On that Saturday night, I received a last message from Anne. A different message. "Elmere, can we talk?" I had no idea things were at that point, and you know, at that moment something hit me that I can't explain. A kind of silent sadness. Because I saw with my own eyes the price you pay for sustaining lies. When my son's mother, after years of diminishing me in silence, began to see the size of the shadow in which she herself hid. Something in me broke again, but it was a slight break, a clean cut, like glass that cracks but no longer reflects anything. I stared at the ceiling of my room, lying on my side, remembering the first time I took James to a baseball game, with his cap crooked on his head and his eyes shining. How do we get out of that and get here? And if you've ever found yourself wondering where the relationship with someone you loved so much started to unravel, write to me below. He says, "I know how it is," or just, "I understand you." Because there are things that only those who have lived in silence know the weight. And sometimes reading that someone has gone through this also helps us breathe a little better. The next day arrived with a clear sky and an icy wind, and along with him an unexpected visitor, James, alone, no car, no backpack, with the sunken eyes of someone who hasn't slept properly for days. He knocked on my door with his hesitant hand. I opened it, stood on the threshold. He looked at me for long seconds. Then he lowered his eyes. I wanted to understand why. "Do you really want to understand?" Because if you want, tomorrow morning I'll show you where your new father keeps the skeletons, and believe me, it's not in the closet." The doorbell rang shortly after 10 in the morning. I already imagined that she would come. Anne was never one to endure silence for long, and James should have poured all over her. I opened the door slowly. She was there, arms crossed, dressed as if she had come from the market, but with the face of someone carrying a choked order in her throat. I didn't say hello. Me, neither. I just gave her space to come in. She walked into the living room, looked around as if she saw a house that was once hers, but now seemed otherworldly. I sat in my chair, she on the couch. The silence between us lasted longer than would be comfortable for anyone else. But I knew that sooner or later it was going to start. "Elmire, look, I know you're hurt. I would be too, but does it have to be this way, so hard, so final?" I kept looking at her, the aged face, the hands shaking a little. It was strange to see her like this, without the tone of someone who has all the answers. This time it seemed small, frail. "He's your son," she continued. "You're desperate, Elmire, aimless. Dylan said he can't do more than he already did, that James needs to grow, to mature. But he doesn't have the emotional structure for that now. You know this better than anyone. Anne, emotional structure is not born from hugs. It is born from the limit. It is born of the fall. I held him for years, and what I got back was contempt. He didn't mean that. He was nervous, inflamed. It's Dylan. He puts things in James's head. He said what he thought. He only had courage because he was leaning on his palms and the smiles of another man." She lowered her eyes. For the first time, Anne did not retort. He didn't even try to defend Dylan. He was silent, as if she had been pulled abruptly to a place in reality that she avoided visiting for a long time. "You've always been better than him," she murmured, almost breathless, "and yet you traded me for him. And that's okay, Anne, I'm over it, but now I will no longer hold the choice of others as if it were my own." She took a deep breath, her eyes starting to fill. I knew she hadn't gone there out of pride. He had gone because the mask of the new home was falling. Dylan, the man with the Italian suits and self-help phrases, had shown his true face. His support was only from the window. When the bills came in, he turned his back. And James was just an uncomfortable weight in the middle of his new image. "Elmire, if not for him, do it for yourself, for who you have always been, a good man, with heart. Being good is not about continuing to let yourself be used, Anne. To be good sometimes is to know when to close the door. This here," I pointed to the ground, to the house, to my own peace, "is not revenge. It's a limit." She bit her lips, trying to hold back her tears, and at that moment I no longer saw the woman who left me. I only saw a mother trying to save a son who never learned to swim because there were always people carrying him on their backs. "So, that's it? Are you really going to drop it?" "I'm not letting him fall, I'm just coming out from the bottom." She stayed there for a few more seconds, then he got up. He walked to the door. When he touched the doorknob, he stopped and said without looking back, "He still loves you, Elmire. He just doesn't know how to show it. But if one day he understands, I hope you're still around." And he left. I closed the door slowly. I leaned my back against the wood and closed my eyes. I didn't cry, but I felt everything, the end of a cycle. The sound of something that ends is not a rumble, it is silence. And the house, at that moment, was mute. I went to the kitchen, put a kettle on the fire. I prepared my mint tea. I sat on the porch, looked at the clear sky. I knew that the newfound peace was still fragile, because something told me that James wasn't going to stop there. Not him, not after that. And even less so when he discovered what was behind the mask of the man he said he admired. Have you ever had the feeling that someone who seemed untouchable was about to fall in an ugly way? That's what I felt at that moment. And the truth, when it started to come out of the mouth of the accountant Ellen, came with documents, and with dates, and with names. And get ready, because what I found out about Dylan can change everything, including the way my own son looks at him. After Anne left, the house was even quieter than before. It was as if the air had become heavier, but at the same time cleaner. I sat on the porch with my still hot tea in my hands and watched the cars pass slowly down the street. Deep in the yard, the lilacs were starting to lose their blooms. The end of spring was coming, and it was there in the silence of that late morning that I understood that it was all not just about James. It never was. The hole was further down. It was about the man who appeared with shining shoes and promises of stability, and who subtly dismantled what was left of my family, while I, silently, still helped pay for the gas in his car, without knowing it. Dylan. The name kept hammering in my head. I didn't go after revenge. That was never part of me. But I was looking for clarity, of justice. Because one thing I've learned in all these years of life: when you take off the base, even the most beautiful lie collapses. And that man, with all the varnish he carried, had too many cracks to continue standing. But no one looked. No one listened. Just me. And this time, I wasn't going to pretend I didn't see it anymore. I started by pulling from memory the times when Dylan appeared with that black briefcase, talking about consultancies, investment funds, corporate card. He always spoke loudly, as if trying to convince himself of his own importance. I remembered once, still in the first year of his marriage to Anne, when he commented at a dinner, "There are a lot of people afraid of the revenue. I'm friends with the bank manager." I laughed inside at the time, but I wrote it down in my heart. Now it made sense. The next morning I went to Bettendorf, neighboring city. I took with me a folder with notes, some statements, and an envelope with copies of old conversations between James and Dylan that I retrieved from my email. When I got there, I stopped in front of the building of the investment company he claimed to own, a beautiful building, mirrored facade. But inside, only 2 rooms work. I went in, asked to speak with the person in charge of DC Financial Consulting. The lady at the front desk told me that Mr. Dylan was on a business trip. I just thanked him and left. But I took a picture of everything, including the sign in the neighboring room where a law firm operated. I had the intuition to write it down. Back home, I called Ellen, the accountant. I explained that I was cross-checking some information. She hesitated at first, but after a while she vented. He said that in recent months, Dylan had been operating accounts under different names, including making withdrawals in the name of Anne's company, something that legally was very dubious. She also said that contracts with investors were increasingly rare, and that she had been instructed to clear certain expenses from the accounting, but she kept copies, many copies. "If something happens to me, I want you to have it, Mr. Elmire. I've already had everything scanned. I can deliver it to you on a flash drive." "And why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because people like Dylan think they can get through life unscathed. But one time, someone sees. And if you've been listening this far, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. Sometimes, telling this story like this, looking at this old camera that my granddaughter lent me, is as if I were talking to someone on the balcony, and knowing that there's someone listening. A light turns on in a corner that I thought was off. That night, I was organizing the documents that Ellen sent me. A silent dossier. I had no hate on my hands. He had focus. I was going to protect the little I had left, what I built with effort. I was going to show, in my own way, that even the silence of an old man can turn into a storm when the limit is crossed. But what I didn't know yet was that someone very close to Dylan was about to look for me. And this person, he had in his hands the key that was missing to collapse everything. Can you imagine who it would be? For it prepares the heart. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come through the enemy. It comes from the mouth of those we least expect. 2 days after talking to Ellen, I grabbed my brown coat, the same one I wore to the divorce hearing, and went to Tom Halpin's office. He was an old acquaintance of mine, serious, discreet lawyer, one of those who do not speak more than necessary. At the time Anne left me, he was the one who advised me to sign what I signed, even though he knew that I was giving up almost everything. I remember the phrase he said at that time, while packing the lawsuit papers. "Elmire, sometimes losing is just the fastest way to get rid of what is no good." I never forgot it. I entered the office, and the receptionist, still the same as before, offered me coffee. I refused. Tom greeted me with a firm handshake and a look of someone who has already understood that when a man like me returns there after so long, it's because something serious is about to happen. I sat down in front of him, opened my briefcase, and spread the papers on the table. Extracts, screenshot of conversations, bank documents, copies of the suspicious movements that Ellen had passed on to me. And in the middle of it all, my letter to James, the same one I left in his mailbox, as a period. Tom put on his glasses, read silently. When he finished, he nodded lightly and said, "I expected to see you here sooner or later, Elmire, and, to be honest, I'm happy that it came now, before it became a worse trap. I've waited too long, Tom, because of hope, shame, or whatever. Yes, you did, but there is still time. What you brought me here is solid. We will do it the right way. No fuss, but firmly." He explained to me that the first step would be to formalize, by legal means, the total severing of the patrimonial bond with James. All payments made, even without a written contract, could be attested by statements and receipts. This showed a pattern, a kind of continuous informal support, as he put it. But from the letter, everything changed. He also recommended sending Dylan a formal cease and desist notice, a technical term for saying, "Stop using my name, my money, and my good faith as a shield for your dirty dealings." This can make him try to get closer or even pressure you. "But if it happens, we'll already be prepared," Tom said calmly. "I wrote everything down. I signed what I needed to sign right there." Tom said that in 2 days the paperwork would be filed and the documents sent by registered mail. That gave me a strange feeling of relief and emptiness at the same time. It was like erasing a name from the wall of a house you built yourself, but that hasn't belonged to you for years. When I left the office, the sky was clear, and the wind carried a smell of wet earth, even though it had not rained. I walked to the car slowly with my head full. Inside, I no longer felt angry. What I felt was something else, a kind of commitment to myself. For the first time in a long time, I was taking care of myself, of what I built with my own knees snapping on top of scaffolding. And if you've ever been through that moment when you realize that being fair to others also requires you to be fair to yourself, so stay here with me, because look, the most painful part hasn't even started yet, and when it arrives, you will understand why I needed all this silence so much. In the late afternoon, while organizing the papers at home, Adeline arrived. She looked at me with that little way of hers, as if she felt things before we even said it. He sat next to me at the table and asked, "Dad, what are you doing?" I looked at her, lightly caressed her hand and replied, "I'm just leaving everything in the right place, dear. Is that it?" But what I didn't tell you is that same day I had received a call from an unknown number, a young, nervous voice. "Mr. Elmire, this is Amanda Peters. I'm Dylan's niece, and I think you need to know what he's doing with your family's name. Do you have a minute?" And what she told me, it was more than a warning. It was the beginning of a public fall that no one could hold. Are you ready to know what an angry niece can reveal about her uncle who lives on a facade? Because what she gave me, it was worth more than any revenge. I returned home with Amanda's voice still echoing inside my head. She told me things I could never have imagined. Or maybe deep down I already imagined it. But you know when we push distrust under the rug because we're too tired to fight with our own instinct? That's that. But now it was no longer instinct. It was a fact, it was a given, it was a document. And that night, after the simple dinner I had prepared, vegetable soup on toast, I sat down in front of my old computer, logged into Wi-Fi slowly as I always do, and went to research. I started with the public records of Dylan's company. His name, the name of the firm, the partners, the addresses. In a few clicks, I already found something strange. Repeated addresses. Partners who appeared in other bankrupt companies. Debts opened and closed in record time. What's more, a company linked to him had transactions with deposits in banks in the Cayman Islands. For those who know the least bit of accounting, this is already a red light. I sent all this to Ellen. It took her less than an hour to answer me. Elmire, what you discovered here is serious, but there's more. I'm scared. But I think you need to know, since last year the Federal Revenue Service has placed DC Financial on the list of companies under investigation for tax evasion. Dylan's name appears as executive advisor, not as owner, but it is what moves everything. The names in the minutes are orange. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth, as if he had drunk vinegar unintentionally. Dylan has always been this figure who uses beautiful words to hide the dirt. You know those men who don't raise their voices, but raise others only to knock them down later when no one is looking? And for years, he was called the winner inside my house. Worse, inside the heart of my own son. I got up from my chair, went to the living room bookcase, and took an old picture frame. Me, Anne and James Small, in front of our first house in Cedar Rapids. A summer Saturday. The day we set up the white picket fence together. I remember it as if it were now. James painting the wood with more paint on the clothes than on the brush. Anne smiling, sitting on the step with a glass of iced tea. And me, with the feeling that life was on track. That all it took was love and effort. We are easily deceived when we want to believe. Do you also have those memories that stick in your soul like a knot? Those that hurt and warm up at the same time? If you have, write me in the comments. Share with me. There is a memory that never left your chest, good or bad. Sometimes sharing a memory like this is like opening a window in a room that has been closed for a long time. I went back to the computer and continued digging. I found out that Dylan used the name of a charitable foundation to move some of the money, a so-called Bright Path Futures, which in theory helped low-income young people with scholarships. But what I saw in the statements was another type of path, money that came in and disappeared in less than 48 hours. Ghost names, P.O. box addresses. Dylan wasn't just a liar, he was a professional manipulator. And I, without knowing it, helped sustain his image for almost a decade. Anne boasted of having a prestigious husband. James referred to him as an example. And me? I was the loser, the weight, the old father. But that morning, facing those tests, I didn't feel hatred. I felt ashamed for letting his facade shine blind me, for having kept silent so many times. But something else was born there too. A decision. I wasn't going to let that go. Not out of revenge, but for justice. He was no longer going to allow him to deceive those who still believed in that expensive suit and the soft voice. I closed everything, turned off the computer and went to the window. The sky was clear, full of stars. The kind of night when we look at it and think, is it today that everything changes? And I think it was, because the next day, I was going to do what I never thought I would do, and it wasn't going to be alone. Amanda had said she was willing to go all the way with me, and what she delivered to me by email that morning, it was simply explosive. A document that Dylan signed with his own hand, a fraud, a well-known name, and a copy he didn't even know existed. But what was so serious about this paper that it could change the course of everything? And more importantly, would James, when he found out, still have the courage to call this man father? I made an appointment with Dylan on a Wednesday morning at a low-key cafe in Moline, across the river. I chose that place on purpose, not too far, not too close. A place where no one knew us, where I could look that man in the eye without interruptions, without unnecessary witnesses. I arrived first. I sat at a table near the window, ordered only a black coffee, and watched the movement outside. Cars passing slowly, the traffic light changing color, people coming and going as if life was always so simple. Inside, I was calm. But it's that kind of calm that you only feel after you've been beaten up by a lot of life. A calm that hardens from within, like old wood. Dylan came on a few minutes later. Navy blue suit, bright watch, perfume too strong for that time of day. He saw me and opened a smile of those rehearsed, which only deceives those who want to be deceived. "Elmire," he said, opening his arms as if we were old friends. "What a surprise you call me that. I'm here to help, you know. I know things with James got out of hand. I didn't get up. I didn't even offer my hand. I just pointed to the chair in front of me. He was surprised but sat down. And when he sat down, I was no longer so comfortable. The silence between us weighed first. I let him. He should break it. "So," he began, adjusting the clock, "let's talk about James." The boy is shaken. You know what he looks like. Impulsive, emotional. He needs stability. And, well, this includes you going back on some decisions you made. "Is that so?" I replied, staring at him. "Funny. I thought stability was his specialty. Isn't that how you present yourself out there?" He laughed, a short, almost automatic laugh. But the eyes, her eyes squinted. He realized then that I hadn't come to ask for a favor. "Look, Elmire," he said, crossing his arms, "I know you're hurt. I know James said things he shouldn't, but you're also exaggerating. Cut him like that, without warning. This is dangerous. The boy can mess up." I took a deep breath. I leaned my body forward. I kept the tone low, firm, slow, that kind of voice that comes before the sound. "Dylan, I didn't call you here to talk about James. I called you to talk about you." He blinked, fast. That disarmed him a little. "From me?" "Yes, of your business, of his investments, from the movements of DC Financial, from Bright Path Futures, and transfers to Cayman." His laughter died in his mouth. He tried to disguise it, look to the side, adjust the sleeve of his jacket, but I had already seen the tremor in the corner of the mouth. "Elmire, you don't know what you're talking about. That's all technician. Big company stuff." "Big company?" I blurted out, tilting my head. "What works in 2 rented rooms in Bettendorf? The one where the receptionist doesn't even know your full last name?" His face became motionless, tense, rigid. "I know everything, Dylan. Every line, every name, every penny that came in and went out. And if you provoke me, if you try to use James as a shield again, I send everything to the IRS on the same day. And this time it won't just be investigation. It will be impeachment, process, prison, if you're lucky." He cracked a crooked smile, but it was another kind of smile. The smile of someone who tries to hide his fear. "Do you think you can intimidate me?" "Intimidate? No. You are the one who tries to intimidate. I just came to warn you that your time is up. You called the man who supported your stepson for 10 years a loser, the man who paid for a car, house, college, bills. You grew up on my silence, but now it is my silence that will sink you." He took a deep breath, clicked his tongue on the roof of his mouth and said, "You don't have the courage to do that." I leaned back in my chair, held the cup with both hands and replied, "Dylan, courage is all that is left when we lose what we loved." For a moment he said nothing. He just looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger for the first time, a man he had never really understood. "So that's it?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "Do you want war?" "No," I replied. "I want respect. But if there is only war on your side, I will not run away from it." He stood up abruptly, adjusted his jacket, breathed like someone who swallows pride and anger at the same time. "You don't know who you're messing with, Elmire." "Yes, I do," I replied. "With a man who built his own life on the wind, and the wind changed direction." He walked off fast, almost tripping over the carpet. I stood there finishing my coffee, feeling a strange peace. That kind of peace we feel when we finally put everything in its proper place. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to threaten. I just had to tell the truth. And sometimes, the truth is heavier than any punch. But on the way back home, something strong crossed me. Because when a man like Dylan is cornered, he doesn't back down. He reacts. And that's exactly what happened that same night, when the phone rang and a voice I knew well said, "Dad, I need to tell you something about Dylan." Urgent, and what my son told me. It was worse than I imagined. Who knew Dylan's downfall would start with James's own mouth? The day after my meeting with Dylan, I woke up before the sun. The house was still dark, silent, the way that only those who live alone understand. The kettle took a longer time to sizzle, as if even she was carrying the weight of the day I had ahead of me. I sat at the table with my black coffee, spread out the papers Tom had prepared, and took a deep breath. That was the day of the definitive cut. Not only money, not only the house, but a lifetime of crutches for those who never learned to walk. For a moment my fingers trembled as I held the pen. Because look, we always think we're going to be strong when we decide something. But when it comes time to sign, to put on paper that you are no longer carrying your own child, the weight changes place. It's not easy. It never is. But I signed it. One by one, I transferred the title of the house. The property where James lived thanks to my savings, that would now be sold, and the money reinvested in my retirement, the way it should have been from the beginning. I revoked any old co-ownership, any informal document that could be interpreted as my responsibility. I froze old accesses, passwords, permissions that I had left open years ago, when I still thought we were all on the same side. In practice, it was simple, in the soul. There was nothing simple about it, but it was necessary. It was the last piece of a gear that I had been quietly adjusting. After everything was signed, I went to the post office. I handed over 3 registered envelopes, one to James, one to Anne, one to Dylan. I didn't put poison in the words. There was no hatred, only truth. On James's envelope I wrote something that took me 40 minutes to get on paper. "Son, I'm not going to stop you from learning to be a man anymore. I will no longer sustain your falls. I will no longer protect you from yourself. If you want to build something with me, I'll be here, but not on top of me." It was a goodbye and a beginning at the same time. In Anne's envelope, I explained that I had done nothing for revenge, but for survival. And in Dylan's, well, that was just a formality. 2 direct lines. "Don't use me anymore. Don't use my name. Don't use my silence." Signed, dated, sent. I returned home walking slowly, as someone who needs to feel the ground after a long time, floating in a life that no longer made sense. When I opened the door, the air was different, lighter, as if I had taken weight off my shoulders, from the room, from the walls. I sat in the armchair in the living room and stared at the memories around me, the photos, the objects that remained, what was left after the storm, and it was then that I felt silence, a big, deep silence that no longer hurt. Because now it was a silence of mine. For the first time in years, nothing pulled me back, nothing drained me, nothing asked of me more than I could give. And it's funny, when we stop supporting those who call you weak, the world begins to slowly reorganize itself. Later that afternoon, my cell phone went quiet. No call from James, no message from Anne, no bravado from Dylan, nothing. As if they were all trying to understand what happened when the loser ceased to be everyone's mattress. And I felt, deep down, that the ruin that had always befallen me was beginning to change direction. Because when you take off the foundation, even the most beautiful castles crumble. But the silence would not last long. I knew it. It was written in the air, and there was no other way. At dusk, while I was closing the curtains in the living room, the telephone vibrated on the table, a number that I recognized right away. It was James. But this time, the tone of the call was not the same as before. There was something different, heavy, urgent, something that would make this whole game turn upside down. What does a child say when he realizes that he has lost his ground, and that the man he called father may never have been what he seemed? The phone vibrated 3 times before I decided to answer it. I already knew it was James, not just by the number, but by the kind of silence that precedes certain calls. It's a heavy silence, which we feel in the air even before hearing the voice. I answered slowly, without haste, without preparing any sentence. I just let the sound in, and on the other side, his breathing came shaky, uneven, like someone who ran or cried. "Dad, Father, please, listen to me." I kept quiet. Sometimes silence is the only way for a man to understand the size of his own fall. He insisted, swallowed hard, and continued. I received the papers, the notification, the cut, the letter. Did you really do it? I closed my eyes. His voice no longer had arrogance. There was no mockery. It didn't have the poison of dinner. It was another voice. It was the 10-year-old boy who was running after me in the backyard, but a grown boy who took too long to understand where life was falling apart. "I did, James," I replied. "I had to do it." There was silence on the other side, but it wasn't that silence of anger he used to punish me. It was the silence of someone who carries a truth in his chest for the first time. He began to speak fast, running over words. "Dad, I went to Dylan's house. He doesn't want to know about it. He said he won't get involved. He said that it's not his problem, that I have to make do. He left me at the door, Dad. He left me outside." I squeezed the arm of the chair tightly, not out of pity, but because I already knew. I always knew. Dylan only welcomes as long as he serves his own ego. When the weight starts knocking on his door, he hides. "I left on foot," James continued. I don't have the car anymore, and at work there, they sent me away. They said I arrived too late. I have no money, Dad. I have nowhere to go." I looked out the window. The sun was setting, tinting the sky orange and pink. The shadows of the yard stretched as if the day was stretching its last breath before night fell. And in a way, that's what I heard in his voice. The last breath of pride, the last thread of false certainty. He continued, "Dad, I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. I did everything wrong. I repeated everything he said, thinking you were weak, thinking you were a weight. I didn't see anything, nothing. I was an idiot. I was unfair, but Dad, I'm desperate. Please, answer me. Says something." I took a deep breath. It was difficult. Because a father's love does not die, but it is not infinite either. And that moment, it was the narrow space where love and limit touch, where the old man needs to speak like a father, but without retreating like a man. "James," I said calmly, as if talking to someone injured, "you're just feeling the weight of the choice you made now. The world has not turned against you. He only returned what you pushed to him. Life charges. Life always charges." He cried. I heard. And the silence after the crying was a silence that cuts the soul of any father. Even when the wound was opened, he was the one who opened it. "Dad, come back to me. Just a little. Help me one last time. Please." I closed my eyes, my chest tightened. Not for the request, but for the come back to me. He finally saw that, in fact, it was never Dylan, it was never Anne, it was never anyone. It has always been me. I was there. I paid the price. I held his world while he learned to point the finger. And look, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. If this story is touching you in any way, like this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Sometimes sharing the pain is what saves someone we can't even imagine. I went back to talk. My voice came out firm, but not cold. "James, I won't carry you again, but I can walk by your side. If you want to learn, if you're ready to get up on your own, the help you want..." It is not help, it's escape, and I won't give you escape any more." He kept quiet, very quiet, and after a few seconds he whispered, "I don't know how to start, Dad." "Then it's time to find out." The phone went silent, not turned off. I just mute, and in that silence I felt that he was changing. Little, slow, but changing. Only, as I dealt with the pain of my son falling apart, something else was happening outside of this little circle, something bigger, something that didn't just involve family, but law, justice. And Dylan's name was starting to appear in places he never imagined, and the question that hammered in my head was, what happens when the mask falls? Not only inside his house, but throughout the country. I knew that, after that call from James, life would ask me for firmness. No anger, no revenge. Firmness. And firmness is something you don't buy, you don't inherit, you don't learn from any book. Firmness is something that we manufacture within our own pain, slowly, like someone who molds wood in the cold. So the next day, early in the morning, with the sky still a little faded blue and the smell of coffee passing through the house, I took the folder with all the documents Ellen and I had gathered and went to Tom's office. The folder seemed too heavy for something so thin, and I didn't know if it was the paper or whatever it meant. I handed everything to Tom. He looked at each page, slowly, with that air of someone who has seen powerful people fall for much smaller mistakes. In the end, he closed the briefcase with both hands and said, "Elmire, this is not just irregularity, this is a tax crime, and the big ones." He said he wasn't going to waste time. I would send everything to the right contacts, in the right department. He also said that Dylan's niece, Amanda, was right to warn, because it wasn't just hidden dirt. It was dirt running down the edges, ready to drip into the living room of anyone who came close. He filed everything that same afternoon, and I came home feeling that strange feeling that without lifting a finger, I had moved a huge stone. But what happened in the following weeks? No one could have predicted it. Me neither. 2 weeks later, I woke up to the noise of the neighbor's television. She always left the news at high volume, as if she were going to talk to the presenter. And that day, it was her voice that I heard first. My God. But wasn't this man the top of the galaxies? I even laughed because only she spoke like that. But when I went to get my newspaper at the door, I saw the headline on the cover, "Bettendorf's financial consulting firm in the IRS's crosshairs." The photo. It was from Dylan's building, exactly the one where I've been, exactly the door I photographed. I sat on the porch and stared at the newspaper as if watching a fire in the distance, knowing that the spark, it came out of his own hands. There are moments in life when we realize that God, time, and justice go hand in hand, and that was one of them. The next day, another local newspaper published a second story. Clients withdraw investments after suspicion of oranges and embezzlement. Lee. The photo was now of Dylan entering the building, with that way of him who is always 2 steps above the world. But the eyes, they were not the same. They were wide, tense, a little lost, as if, for the first time, he had realized that his stage was collapsing and that the audience was no longer applauding. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate, I didn't feel any pleasure, but I felt something like order, as if the world was just putting the pieces in the exact place where they should always have been. And in the midst of this storm came the quietest part. The letter from the court confirming James's eviction. When I picked up the envelope from the mailbox, I stared at it for a few minutes, my son's name printed in black ink, a beautiful name, which was now accompanied by the word eviction. It was not just a legal word, it was a lesson. The lesson he avoided for years, leaning on me as someone leaning on a railing that never fails. James called me that day, but I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because sometimes man needs to listen only to his own conscience, and my voice at that moment could become a cane, not a direction. He left a message. "Dad, I'm trying to pack my things. I don't have much, but I, I just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking, really thinking, about everything I've done. I sat on the edge of my bed, with my cell phone still in my hand, and I found myself saying softly, as if he could hear it even without a call, "That's all I wanted, son. That you thought." Meanwhile, Dylan. Ah, Dylan. This one was living the hell that he himself built brick by brick with his own hands. Customers withdrawing money, the company frozen, auditors arriving unannounced, the newspapers speculating embezzled amounts, and the most ironic, no one knew yet that the initial complaint had come from a 63-year-old retired man whom he called a loser at the family dinner. And let me tell you something. Sometimes the silence we make is the greatest weapon we have, because when you stop sustaining the lies of others, they collapse on their own. But you know, as I watched it all happen, as each piece fell into place, I also felt something inside, deep inside. The hardest part hasn't arrived yet. Because this story doesn't end with Dylan's fall. It ends with something that took years to happen, something that no money, no document, no process could force, and, if you've been with me this far, is. Because what happens when the son finally knocks on his father's door, not as an accusation but as repentance, it's something that changes everything, and that's what comes next. Want to know what it was like when he returned? Do you want to know the first thing he said when he saw me? Because that part I never forgot. When winter began to announce its arrival here in Davenport, with that thinner wind that passes through our clothes, I already felt that something big was about to happen, and it happened. At the beginning of a cold morning, when there was still a remnant of frost shining on the hood of my truck, I heard the reporter on the kitchen radio saying his name. Dylan Whitmore, Bettendorf's manager, has been subpoenaed to testify in a federal tax investigation involving possible accounting fraud, money laundering, and concealment of assets. I turned off the radio, not out of fright, but because silence sometimes explains more to me than any news. I stood there, looking out the window of the sink, watching the steam from my coffee rise, remembering the day this man came into my family's life, as if wearing a crown. Now, the glow was different, the glow of those who fall. The local press did not make a scandal, no. Here in the Midwest, people speak quietly, investigate quietly, comment only what is necessary. But in a small town, it only takes 3 people knowing to become the subject of 50. In Bettendorf, everyone already knew that the Vision investor was now being investigated for embezzlement, and when the lie arrives at our door without asking permission, even those who defended the culprit start to take steps back. That's what happened to Anne. I heard that she appeared in court, trying to maintain her posture as photographers took pictures of Dylan entering with her head down, but she didn't touch his arm. He didn't even come close. That woman who one day thought she had changed her life for the better now walked like someone carrying a suitcase full of stones. And James, James. My son finally got to the bottom that he spent years digging with his bare hands. The eviction notice arrived, he argued with the officer, tried to get a deadline, tried to call his mother, Dylan, friends. No one showed up. The house, that house I bought, painted, paid for almost a decade, received the final order. He was forced to leave. I watched from afar, standing inside my truck, while 2 guys from the moving company were loading his boxes. I didn't get off, I didn't call, I didn't offer help, because helping at that time would be to take away from him the only lesson he needed to learn. He walked down the sidewalk with 2 suitcases and a coat too thin for the November wind. It looked smaller than I remembered, as if life had shrunk him a few inches. I learned the same day from a social worker known to Adeline that he had ended up in a municipal shelter on Rock Island. And you know what's hardest for a father? It's not seeing the child fall. It's seeing that he only looks at you when the fall hurts more than the pride. Adeline was by my side the whole time. She held my hand sometimes, as if I was her son and not her. I remember one night she said to me, Dad, I know it hurts, but the Lord did what he had to do. James would never grow up as long as you were his crutch. The way she spoke, he had truth, he had strength, he had love. And there was one thing I'll never forget: confidence. That girl trusted my silence, and it was this silence that began to echo in the two who called me a loser without thinking twice. Anne texted me one day saying, "I don't know who Dylan is anymore." I didn't answer, not because I had a grudge, but because for the first time she was getting to know the real world without me serving as a mattress. And James sent me 3 messages in a 2-day period. The first short films, the last feature films. I didn't answer any, because there was something he still needed to understand on his own. Regret only has value when it is born in silence. I walked a lot in the late afternoons near the Mississippi River. That noise of the water helped me think. And as I walked, I wondered what it would be like when he finally came face to face, because I knew the same way we know when the rain will fall, even with clear skies, that this hour was coming. It's strange, but our hearts recognize when the other's heart starts to break in the right way. And at this point in the story, that's when everything started to change direction, because Dylan's fall was already public, it was already supermarket talk, and shame was already stamped on her face. James's desperation had already become routine, but what no one knew, it was what came later. Because before a son asks for forgiveness, he has to go through a place that hurts more than all the others. The place where he finally sees his father, and that's exactly it, that he was standing still. But what happened when he knocked on my door? Right, that's another story, and that's the next part. Want to know what he said before he breathed? Want to know what I saw in his eyes that I had never seen before? Because that changed everything. I remember that late afternoon at Lindsay Park well, the sun slowly lowering, pouring a golden color over the Mississippi River, as if someone from up there had passed a cloth of light on the waters. I walked slowly, feeling the gravel creak under my boots, and each step seemed to take me a little further away from that dinner, of that sentence, of that cut that my own son made inside me. There, seeing the anchored boats rocking slightly, I realized that life has a strange way of teaching us. Sometimes it screams, sometimes it pushes, and sometimes it simply remains silent. And in that silence, I understood that I had won without having to hurt anyone. I just stopped letting myself be hurt. The children running near the swings reminded me of a scene that comes back to me like a portrait that doesn't fade. The tiny James, with a blue cap turned upside down, stumbling to climb on the toy and calling me, "Dad, look at me here." That was the time when he still wanted to impress me, before the world came in, before comparisons, before Dylan. First of all, it turns sour. It's strange how memory chooses what to keep. She does not hold screams, or offense, or loss. He keeps a blue cap, a crooked smile, a request for attention. And I, walking there, realized that I had not lost that boy. I had just stopped supporting the man he had become without realizing that he had lost himself. The wind came stronger, raising a smell of dry leaves mixed with that of the river. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel heavily. I didn't feel charged. I didn't feel ashamed. Alone. Peace. A peace that did not come from victory nor from revenge. It came from the simple fact that I set a limit that I postponed for years, thinking that love was carrying, even when my back could no longer take it. Love is not that. Love is teaching how to walk, and sometimes teaching walking means letting go of the hand. I stopped near a wooden bench, the one that is at the highest point of the park's curve, where we see the whole river opening up to the horizon. I sat down and watched the boats one by one, slowly returning to the pier. That reminded me of my silence at dinner. And like at that moment, when James said what he said, I understood that losing the respect of the child hurts, But losing the respect for oneself hurts more. And there, without shouting, without banging on the table, without responding, I chose myself. I chose my calm. I chose my dignity. It's curious, because a lot of people think that winning is humiliating them back. Shout louder, show strength. But no, winning for me at that moment was to continue being who I was, even when they tried to diminish me. It was me deciding where I didn't stay anymore. It was me getting up from the table without depending on the noise to prove my worth. And on that bench, looking at the Mississippi glowing, I felt it with a clarity that pierced my chest. I thought of Anne too, in her tired look when she asked me to reconsider. For the first time, I realized that she was also paying the price for the choices she made, for the enchantment she had for Dylan's brilliance, that false glow that now faded in public. I saw that she was also shrinking, trying to understand how everything turned upside down so quickly. But that part, this pain, it was no longer mine to fix. I did a lot. I did more than I should. And now, each one needed to learn to live with what they built. When the wind blew stronger and brought the noise of a train passing in the distance, I felt something inside me settle down, like someone who finally finds the right place in the chair after uncomfortable hours. I knew my path was clear. I felt that, despite the sadness, there was a freedom there that I had never experienced, the freedom of not carrying anyone on your lap, the freedom to not be to blame for everything, the freedom not to be the loser I was called, because that was never true. The truth is that I survived everything, and I survived by being myself. But while I breathed that new peace, in that bend in the park, something began to grow in my chest. A strange feeling, as if a step that I thought was already taken was yet to happen. I looked at the river, the trees, the sky that was beginning to darken, and I felt that the story was not yet over. That one last conversation still needed to be had, that one last knot still needed to be undone, and that's when, right there, sitting on that bench, the unexpected happened. Because when I raised my head, I saw someone standing a few meters from me. Someone I didn't expect to meet that evening. Someone who came slowly, as if he didn't know if he could get closer. And when I recognized who it was, my heart beat differently. Do you want to know who was there? Do you want to know what he said before I can even breathe? When I raised my head on that bench in Lindsay Park, the wind bringing the smell of the river and the late afternoon slowly landing over Davenport, I saw James standing a few meters from me, hesitant, thin, with his shoulders slumped like a man who finally understood his own size. But before he took a step, I felt a hand touch mine. It was Adeline. My girl arrived slowly, sat next to me without making a sound, as she always did when I was still trying to keep the house standing after the divorce. She didn't ask anything. He just stood there watching the Mississippi glide, the seagulls diving into the water, and that silence that didn't hurt, a healing silence. I shook her hand, and it was then that I was able to say for the first time out loud, "Sometimes, my daughter, justice arrives in the shape of an empty chair at dinner." She smiled, a small smile full of truth, and in that instant I realized that it was not revenge. It was just life returning the balance that was missing. I stood up calmly, feeling my knees protest as always, and we began to walk down the gravel path. That's when I saw, in the distance, James standing behind a tree, almost hidden, looking at me with a look I hadn't seen since he was about 8 years old. A look of someone who wants to return but still doesn't know how. A look of someone who broke, but maybe you're ready to learn how to put the pieces together. I didn't wave, I didn't call, I didn't turn my face away, I just kept walking. Because at that moment, I understood something that took me a lifetime to learn. There are steps that a father cannot take for his son, and there are paths that only open up when we stop carrying those who don't want to walk. Today, when I look at all this a little more remotely, I see more clearly, to love is not to sacrifice yourself until only the dust is left. To love is to set a limit. It's knowing when to let go of a hand so that the other person can find their own way. I spent years confusing silence with weakness, but I found that my silence was my strength. And what dignity when we decide to wear it. It fits like a custom-made garment. The lesson that remained is simple but profound. No one loses when they choose their own peace. And sometimes the hardest path is the only one that really saves. If you've stayed with me so far, thank you for your company, from the heart. It's strange to tell these things, but knowing that there is someone on the other side listening to me makes it all make sense. A like from you is almost like a hug that warms our soul on cold days here in Iowa. And if you want to come back for another coffee with me, subscribe to the channel. The house is always open. Tell me in the comments of which city you are watching. I love imagining these stories traveling to so many different places. And, if you can, activate the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. Now, don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.